It was supposed to be just another quiet weekend. Just me, my tools, and the plan to take down the lake pool I'd built the previous summer. The weather was perfect. The lake shimmered in the background, and I thought the whole thing would take maybe a few hours, tops. What I didn't expect was the HOA president standing at the edge of my property, arms crossed, phone in hand, and glaring like I was tearing down the White House. A few minutes later, 2 police cruisers pulled up. That's when I realized this wasn't going to be a normal day. Now, before you jump to conclusions, no, I wasn't doing anything illegal. In fact, I was removing the above-ground pool I'd installed with their approval months earlier. But apparently, that didn't matter. Anymore. According to them, I was disrupting community aesthetics and violating removal procedures, whatever that means. I tried to stay calm, but the way they acted, you'd think I was hosting a rave on my lawn. The HOA claimed they were within their rights to report the incident. But when the officers took a closer look, the story started shifting. And fast. The kicker? I wasn't the one who got the warning. Turns out someone had been crossing boundaries for a long time, and not just figuratively. There was more going on behind the scenes than I ever expected. What started as a simple home project quickly turned into a full-blown neighborhood drama. Lines were crossed, rules were twisted, and people who thought they were untouchable started getting uncomfortable. And just when I thought things couldn't get more ridiculous, one of the officers quietly pulled me aside and said something that changed everything. So before you think this is just another HOA horror story, trust me, it's not. You're going to want to hear what happened next. The officer leaned in and said, "You might want to keep your cameras on from now on. There's more going on here than you think." I didn't really know what to make of it, but something about the way he said it stuck with me. It wasn't just a casual warning. It felt like a heads up. Like he knew something about the HOA that I didn't. And considering how fast they'd called the cops on me for taking down my own pool, I figured I'd better take that advice seriously. The HOA president, let's just call her Linda, had been riding me for months. Ever since I put up that lake pool, even though it was approved by the board, she kept finding reasons to stop by. First, it was the color of the fencing around it, then the direction of the filter hose, and even the way the floaties were stored. No matter what I did, it wasn't good enough for her. She made it her mission to nitpick every detail, like she was the neighborhood's personal watchdog. But I had followed every rule, every single one. So when I decided to remove the pool because the weather was turning and I didn't want to deal with winter damage, I didn't think twice. I figured if they complained about putting it up, they'd at least be happy to see it go. Clearly, I was wrong. And when those police cruisers rolled up, I saw a few neighbors peeking through their blinds, probably thinking something major was going down. What made it even weirder was how Linda kept talking over the officers, trying to push her version of events. She seemed desperate, like she needed to make sure the blame landed on me. But as the officers started asking her questions, the tone shifted. And that's when a whole different side of this neighborhood started to show. As the officers began pressing Linda with questions, I noticed her confidence start to crack. She kept glancing toward her clipboard, like she was searching for the right story to tell. One officer asked her why she had called 911 instead of using the non-emergency line, especially for something so minor. She stammered, saying it was a public safety concern, and mentioned something about unauthorized structural removal. But even the officers looked confused. That's when one of my neighbors, Rick, stepped onto his porch and casually called out, "Funny how she didn't call the cops when her nephew was dumping junk into the lake last week." That comment changed the whole vibe. The officers paused. Linda whipped around and shot Rick a glare that could have burned holes through concrete. But he didn't flinch. He just leaned on the railing, arms crossed, like he'd been waiting for a moment like this. That's when I realized this wasn't just about me or the pool. There was more going on in this HOA than I'd thought. People were fed up, and Linda's little empire wasn't as solid as she believed. Later that day, I started getting quiet knocks at my door, neighbors I'd barely spoken to before now wanting to talk. One of them, Melissa, mentioned that Linda had been selectively enforcing rules for years, fining some families for leaving trash cans out too long while turning a blind eye when her own relatives did worse. Another neighbor, James, showed me pictures on his phone of a storage shed Linda's cousin built without a single permit, and it had been up for over a year. Somehow, no one had ever been cited. It all started making sense. The overreaction to my pool takedown wasn't about the pool. It was about control. It was about silencing people who didn't play by her script. And now that someone had pushed back and gotten the cops involved, she was scrambling. But if she thought this whole thing was going away quietly, she had another thing coming. By the next morning, word had spread. People who had never spoken up before were now openly questioning Linda's authority. A few even started digging through old HOA emails and meeting notes. Turns out, some of those official votes Linda always referenced weren't exactly official. One neighbor, Denise, who works in real estate, pointed out that the HOA bylaws had been quietly amended last year, without the required 2/3 majority. It was starting to look like Linda had been making her own rules for a while, hoping no one would notice. Meanwhile, I noticed a car parked across from my house for most of the day. Same SUV, same tinted windows. It didn't move, didn't blink, just sat there. Maybe it was nothing, but after everything that had happened, I wasn't taking chances. I started recording everything: phone calls, conversations, even footage from my security cams. I didn't know what Linda was capable of, but something told me she wasn't going down without a fight. Then came the letter. It was slipped into my mailbox, no return address, no postage, just a typed note with my name. At the top, and a list of supposed violations I'd committed in the past 60 days. Some were completely made up, like improper storage of tools and unapproved driveway activity. Others were things I'd already resolved weeks ago. At the bottom, in bold red letters, it read, "Failure to comply may result in legal action or property fines. No HOA letterhead, no signature." I brought it straight to one of the officers I'd met during the pool incident. He didn't say much, but he raised an eyebrow and quietly took a photo of the letter. "You're not the only one getting these," he said. That's when it hit me. This was bigger than just one pool or one homeowner. Something was boiling beneath the surface, and it was about to explode. The HOA drama wasn't just about community guidelines anymore. It was about power, intimidation, and who would finally push back hard enough to stop it. Just when I thought things couldn't get any stranger, I got a message from Rick, the same neighbor who called out Linda during the pool incident. He told me to check the public county records site. I didn't understand why at first, but when I searched my property address, something popped up that made my stomach drop. There was a lien filed under my name from the HOA, and I had never even been notified. No hearing, no warning letters, nothing. Just filed quietly, like they hoped I wouldn't notice until it was too late. I printed the record and walked straight to the HOA office, which Linda conveniently ran out of her converted garage. When I asked for an explanation, she acted clueless, claimed it was a mistake and that she'd look into it. But the way she avoided eye contact and the slight tremble in her voice told me she was caught off guard. She wasn't expecting anyone to dig that deep, and then she slipped. She mentioned a collection deadline that I had never even heard about. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about enforcing rules. This was about money. Quiet fines, fake notices, threats of legal action. It was all a setup to scare people into paying without questioning it. I walked out of there more fired up than ever. But before I even made it back home, something else happened. My phone buzzed with a message from Melissa. She said her backyard camera picked up a man late at night walking around her fence line. When she looked closer, she realized he wasn't just wandering. He was holding a clipboard. The same kind of clipboard Linda always carried. And he wasn't from the neighborhood. That changed everything. This wasn't just Linda overstepping. Someone else was involved, possibly helping her or doing her dirty work behind the scenes. And if they were sneaking around people's homes late at night, who knew how far they'd go? The pool was just the spark. Now the whole neighborhood was sitting on a powder keg, and something was about to blow. By the end of that week, the tension in the neighborhood was thick. People weren't just whispering anymore, they were demanding answers. A group of us, including Rick, Melissa, and Denise, decided to take action. We called for an emergency HOA meeting and made sure every homeowner knew about it. Word spread fast. That Saturday, the community center was packed, standing room only. Linda showed up late, looking rattled, still clutching that same old clipboard. But this time, no one was afraid to speak up. Denise stood first and laid out the evidence: fake amendments, missing vote records, and the shady fines that had never gone through proper channels. I followed with the lien paperwork, the warning letter, and the footage Melissa had captured of the mystery man with the clipboard. Then Melissa dropped the real bombshell. Her camera had caught a clear shot of the guy's face, and her cousin, who worked for the county, ran a background check. He wasn't a contractor or inspector. He was a debt collector, hired under the table. And he had no legal right to be on anyone's property. You could feel the mood shift instantly. Gasps, murmurs, phones coming out to take pictures of the documents. Even some of Linda's loyal supporters started backing away from her. When the police officer who'd warned me before walked in, off duty but clearly there to keep things civil, Linda froze. He handed a folder to the board's vice president and calmly said, "This is everything we've been documenting." Linda didn't say a word. She just stood there as the board read through the stack of complaints, legal findings, and recorded statements. Then, almost too quietly to hear, the vice president said, "Effective immediately, Linda is suspended pending investigation." Everyone in the room exhaled at once: relief, shock, satisfaction. But just as people started leaving, I got a text from an unknown number. It simply said, "You think she acted alone?" I looked around, heart pounding. The pool was gone. The warnings had stopped, but it seemed the story was far from over. Over the next few weeks, things finally started to settle down. The HOA board launched a full review of Linda's actions, and several of her decisions were reversed, including the false lien on my property. Homeowners who'd been quietly fined or threatened came forward with their own stories, and the board took real steps to fix the mess. Transparency meetings were scheduled. Voting rules were clarified. People finally started trusting the system, again, or at least paying attention to how it worked. As for Linda, she officially resigned before the investigation was completed. No apology, no explanation, just a typed letter handed in and a for sale sign on her lawn a few days later. Word was she moved out of town to avoid further legal trouble. And while that mystery text about her not acting alone still bugged me, nothing else ever came of it. Maybe it was a scare tactic. Maybe someone else was involved but backed off once things got public. Either way, it was quiet now. The lake pool was long gone, but what stuck with me wasn't the pool. It was the way people came together. What started as an HOA conflict turned into something bigger. Neighbors who barely said hello before were now checking in, watching out for each other. The fake authority, the threats, the shady warnings, they only worked because people were scared and silent. Once that changed, everything else did too. If there's one thing I took from all this, it's to know your rights and trust your instincts. Whether it's a simple home project or a fight with an HOA, standing your ground matters. And sometimes, just asking the right questions is all it takes to break the silence. Thanks for watching, and always, always read the fine print.